Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guest is Crrow777. The discussion with Crrow is wide-ranging as we talk about the unparalleled censorship taking place across the world, but especially as it pertains to the alternative research community, resulting in what Crrow refers to as a modern-day book burning. And so, without further ado, here's the conversation with Crrow777. Crrow, before we get started, because it's the first time you're on the show, and I'm sure you've gone through this before, but many of my listeners I know who you are, but there are certainly others that have not heard of you, or maybe they heard of you in passing. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your path in life and how that path led you to the work that you're doing today.
Okay. I don't know where to draw the line to start. I've always kind of been a person who didn't go along the way I was supposed to, even in school. And I've always questioned things. And, I guess I'll fast forward up to where I went into the United States Marine Corps. I wouldn't, it was funny when I was in the Marine Corps, I was a bit older than most of the people around me. And, some of the sergeants and everything would like to call me the grand old man of the Marine Corps, making fun that I had it all figured out and I wasn't as easily controllable as the younger people around me. But I could accomplish things, which was my ticket through the Marine Corps. And I was put in positions because people recognized that I could probably figure out a system and get the work done. In the Marine Corps, I think it's really where my mind began to shift radically, to none of this is correct, man. We're in this bizarre kind of template where everyone's marching to a drum beat, and I'm looking around saying, why isn't anyone questioning the drum beat? Why are we doing this? And then if I fast forward up to that very fateful night of Yom Kippur in 2012, when I was out trying to film things transiting the moon and I accidentally caught the best example of the lunar wave we have, it took me a while to figure out that was important. And then as time went on, I think most people are familiar with the story, but I would add, sorry, let me kill this thing. I would add that that's really what got me looking at the physical environment that we exist in. And the more I began to challenge it, the more I became, you get to a point where you have a problem. You're like, I'm seeing all these things that aren't right. How can this be when all these people in white lab coats for my whole life in every textbook have told me, this other thing? And then at some point you reach your adult mind and you realize, I'm no different than the guy in the white lab coat who did this. He did what he did. I'm doing what I did. I can test this. And that's what I did. I set out to test things, and everything I tested, damn near everything I tested, I could prove was not properly described to my satisfaction. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
Okay. And your handle, for lack of a better term, Crrow777, a lot of people that I know have asked me about that because I would post your material, and some would come back and say that it had something to do with Aleister Crowley and 777, right, the lightning flash of creation. So what exactly does Crrow777 mean?
All right, let's address this full on. I have addressed it other times, but here on your show, we'll address this full out. And first of all, let me say, initially when I set up the YouTube channel, it was going to be just Crrow. But there were tons of things Crrow out there. So it became, how do I differentiate? Encoded within the name Crrow777 is nothing more than my birth name. I have a degree in internet technology, and early on in the internet, when people went to use my corporate strawman birth identity, they would write the letters Crrow to get an email to fill in my full name to send it to me. That's what started it. The sevens, and I'll also add, I never read Crowley until after actually I set up the thing, and I have read the Kabbalistic and the 777s and all that stuff. Totally mutually exclusive, nothing to do with my naming. But anyhow, the sevens came because my wife had pointed out that each of my birth names was derived from a word with 7 letters that actually summed to 7. So that is the full, complete story. And I will say, for the record, and I do not tell lies, I don't do it. For the record, it was mutually exclusive. There was no intent. When I did that, it was simply just like me and my wife sitting there. How do we differentiate my channel? I had all this telescope footage that I was going to put up. And so there's the story. If you have anything to clarify, shoot it at me.
No. So what happened after you read Crowley's work? Did you say,
Well, the funny thing, here's a funny thing. I was aware of it because I actually had the text that's called Liber. I forget what it's called. It has 777 in the title. That's the one I read about 2 years ago, or not all of it. It's pretty tedious reading, actually. But quite a bit of it. I had that on my shelf, when I was in my 20s, and I may have thumbed through it, but never read it. So, I mean, I guess I was aware of it, but not in the way. You see, when I set up my channel, I was whole hog examining our physical environment with a telescope. That's what I was doing. For 4 straight years, I did that. And while I was aware of numerology and all these other things, to be completely forthright, I had no idea how big a part the breaking of numbers, the encoding number, at that point, it just wasn't my focus. I was busy trying to figure out what the hell was going on with the moon and why nothing was leaving low Earth orbit. That was my attention focus, but pretty quickly, and a lot of it had to do with my name, to be honest, because people would come in and say, oh, 77721, that's the blackjack. And, that's a problem. That is a problem. I remember Dave J rode me for something like 2 years, just being a complete pain in my butt. And I don't get at odds with people. And I just stuck to my guns. And over time we talked and we finally met and talked and, but there's no getting away from it. In some ways it was an unfortunate naming, but here's my problem. When you reach your adult higher mind, the proof is in the pudding. If people want to come and examine what I've done, that's really the benchmark. And regardless of whatever I have written as my name, because there was a couple times when I thought, man, I got to change this. And I thought, no, wait a minute. Why? Why do I got to change this? I say what I say. Either that has value or it doesn't. And then I saw other people forming whole numerology or gematria channels, and I saw them lose their way because it instantly became, oh, look, that number's there. There's the 33. Well, no, there's 33s all over this entire world. If you cannot show intent, you are showing nothing.
Right.
Without intent, you got zip. But so there's my big response, and I hope I've clarified it to some degree that helps.
There you go, folks. The mystery is solved, and it's a great brand.
Well, maybe I should address that. You and I talked a bit about. So, I filmed the lunar wave. I held on to it for about a year, and then I finally, made the channel I just told everyone about, and I put it up. When that happened, the floodgate opened, and so much attention came to bear on me. So that's how the Crrow brand came. And while I've done interviews on camera, and Jason and I are actually talking about doing some things, to show the people that we're just people, go on camera. I don't have a problem with that. The whole thing became is that I didn't want to be the center of anything. I didn't want to be famous. And there was a deluge coming and people saying, I'm going to find you on Google Maps and taking apart email headers looking for longitude and latitude. And it just got to be a whole thing. And I put up the brand. And to be honest about that, I had no idea the brand was going to be as effective as it did. I mean, there's nary a country with an internet connection that isn't aware of either the Crrow brand or the lunar wave or something.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, about the personality or the celebrity aspect of this Crrow. You and I talked about this before we got started with the show, and I had said that myself, I'm not interested in being a personality. I'm not interested in being a celebrity in the alternative research community or the truth community, because with that, what happens is, in my view, and there are going to be people that will obviously disagree, is that it could very well take away from your message, because all of a sudden a big bright spotlight is put on you, and then you wind up playing defense most of the time. So I think that you probably feel a similar sense of how to go about this.
Well, here's one thing. A big part of my life has been to try to remove what's called the ego. I've recognized that for a long time, that much of the problem in this world is driven that way. And if you do allow that spotlight to come and you do allow fame to come your way, man, you've got a serious problem, because you're a human being. And so now you're going to be wrestling with your own ego and trying to get out a message. And it's, here's the real thing. And Jason and I covered this in recent shows. Apparently there was a time in this world when someone became famous. It required a period of time because that individual was going to have to do great deeds. So the fame that came to that individual back in the day, before, the cult of personality, before cinema, let's say back, 1700s as a random grab, there had to be a period of a time for some individual to do these great deeds to become famous. And the truth is, you know, if you want to look at someone like me, I'm just some 50-year-old dude. You know, I have done nothing to merit fame. There is nothing about me special. There is nothing that lifts me to deserve more recognition than any person I will meet walking down the street today. And that is really the truth that I try to hold on to. So what it comes down to is we are recognizing things about our world now, and what many call the awakening. That's really the critical thing. That's the critical thing. That's where the spotlight needs to go.
Agreed. Now, with the lunar wave, just to touch on that a little bit, I know we don't want to spend a lot of time on that because you're probably tired of talking about it.
Oh, that's all right.
No, but the lunar wave was something that it was really a great discovery. I remember when I first saw it, it really changed a lot of my thinking about what could possibly be going on with this reality. What is going on? What is that I'm looking at right now? So what was your reaction when you first saw the wave? Did the lunar wave change your path in any way when you were seeking truth? In other words, was it a moment where you said, you know what? I have to shift gears because this is taking me down a completely different road?
Here's what happened, man. I think it was the supermoon of May in 2012. I had busted out my telescope with my young nephew, and some family members are come over. We were just going to look at the supermoon. My nephew was at the eyepiece, and he said, Uncle, there's these black triangles going across the moon. And sure enough, I figured he saw something I would never see it. I got to the eyepiece, and this went on for like 3 hours. And what astounded me at the time was, you know, the moon from your apparent position is moving through the sky. So for these black triangles to be continuously coming between the end of my scope and the moon, I couldn't put logical reason around it because this went on for like 2 or 3 hours. So the moon had moved a distance and this was still going on. My brother-in-law finally sees something like 5 to 7 of them in formation. And so that is what had me. The next day I went out to get a way to hook up my camera to film through my scope. Didn't have it that night. So later, fast forward to Yom Kippur in September, right? And they're at the fall equinox. Might have even been the fall equinox. They misreport the date of of equinoxes all the time. But anyhow, to get to the point, I'm filming, trying to see if I can ever catch another transit, thinking to myself, you know, I'll film for the rest of my life and never film anything close to what we saw that night. And lo and behold, the lunar wave happens. Well, a bit of providence steps in because a couple things happened right as I filmed the lunar wave that are completely unique to that moment in time. The first thing is I always kept centered on the moon. At the time, I was looking at a 3-inch LCD on the back of a camera. I didn't have monitors and all that other stuff that I got later. So I'm crunched up there at night looking at this little 3-inch LCD. And for some reason, I panned below the moon. I never did that. I always thought my odds were best if I kept center up on the moon. But anyhow, the wave starts as I pan below and I don't notice it. I pan back up. The lunar wave catches up to the camera and I see it. My first reaction is, oh, something's failing. After it occurs, I sit there and watch both waves go by. I reach over to hit the delete button. I stop the clip, and for some reason I didn't. There's the second providence that happens this night. Had I done that on the camera, the clip would have been lost forever. For some reason, I didn't. So anyhow, I decide I'll review it. I actually named that clip Weird Scan Line. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what happened? Some technical thing went wrong. But you see, in my subconscious, I'm a digital guy. That's not the way digital failure happens in an organic method like we're seeing. And that's what was eating at mine. So I put it on my computer, look at it a few times, and something is gnawing at me. Sometime later, quite a bit later, I finally say, to hell with this. I need the disk space because I got all this HD footage, and I delete it. I lay down that night, and that's when I had the aha moment. And I went, oh my God, I realized that is a provably filmed event. Because I panned below the moon, panned above the wave, and the wave caught the camera. If it was equipment failure of any kind, it would have had to have been locked to the pan. So I ran out, turned on my computer, restored the clip out of my trash, looked at it, and it scared the bejesus out of me. All at once, it was like my whole world came crashing down. I realized all at once that this is real. This is, you know, what my subconscious had been holding on to. This is not digital failure, and it's provably not. And from that point forward, complete paradigm shift in my existence.
So you originally deleted the clip, the footage?
off my computer into the little trash can dealy whopper there. Yeah. That same day I restored it, but yeah.
Now, what happened after releasing it? I remember watching a couple of your videos, and you were getting, I guess, backlash and pushback and debunking from the mainstream science community. Is that correct?
Oh boy, I got rode like a white pony for about a year and a half. And it was unfortunate the way this had to go, because I was examining it and showing it to other smart people. And then at some point, we noticed the energy pulses in the clip that were included in some of my videos back in the day. And we noticed other things. And of course, there's a shadow that goes across the upper. We were just really starting to dissect this clip and really understand there's something important here. But people first started saying, you faked this. And I kept saying, I don't fake anything. At some point, I even put up a channel trailer. I don't remember when I did it, that takes an oath that I'll never fake anything on this channel. But you see, they're saying, come on, people look at the moon and have been looking at the moon forever. How come you're the only guy that filmed this? Well, I'll point out a couple things. In astronomy, and I was an avid astronomer back all the way into the mid 90s when I first bought that big 8-inch telescope, you're taught that looking at a full moon is almost not worth your while because there's no shadow. There's nothing interesting going on. And that's primarily what I had been doing. But anyhow, to cut to the chase, the next person who films the lunar wave is, guess what? Me. And that makes it worse. Now we know you're lying. Now we know you faked it, because now you're the only person who's claiming to have filmed this thing twice. Even channels start to crop up where they're putting the footage I filmed in an editor and claiming that they made it in the editor when it's in fact just the film that, the footage that I provided. Finally, about a year and a half later, I believe it was the spring equinox, guy in Germany films a wave that's not really the same caliber, but enough for me to say, look, there's something here. Well, fast forward to now, after all that heat, and believe me, to the point where I changed emails at one point. I quit answering emails. It got bad. I think 20, or maybe I'm just guessing now, I don't even know, 20 or 30 people have filmed it now, or some version of it. I'm not convinced that all the footage I've seen is the same thing, and it's a bit unusual to me that the very first filming in 2012 there that I did still holds up as probably the strongest example. But even then, something intuitive in me, when I realized that it was important footage, I knew it was connected to the equinoxes. As time went on, it did demonstrate that almost all the filmings were near either the fall or spring equinox, though at this point we even have, I think, examples from close to the solstice in the winter. For the longest time, there were no winter captures, but that could simply be due to it's not great weather in the winter and people aren't filming as much. Who knows? So
these folks that are supposed to be astronomers, professional astronomers, when they're in observatories, Crow, what exactly are they looking at? In other words, not just the moon, but let's just take other, I hate to call them planets, but Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, and so on. When they're looking at that through an observatory, through a very powerful telescope, they'll tell us, that people like yourself and me, that we're crazy. We're absolutely crazy, because then they'll put out their pictures and they'll say, this is what we're looking at and this is what it looks like. Contrary to what all those tinfoil hat wearers are saying, this is what it looks like. What are they doing in those observatories?
Well, first of all, you got to realize that one thing I have realized about the age we've come to, and I always use the example of what happened one night recently here at dinner, where a heart surgeon and a PhD were over here for dinner. And they were talking about the election and how mad they were that Trump got in. And I pointed out, why are you upset? Your vote doesn't do anything to seat a president. You learned in high school that it's the Electoral College. And if you look into how the Electoral College is set up, you'll understand that it's just a backdoor for the same people. They got upset. Not only did they get upset, they began to defend the very system, which has no defense. If you look at it, it is what it is. So I began to understand that the more educated into a system, the more your natural humanness defends the system in which you've been trained. So that's part of what I think goes on. But here's the rub. I at one point put out a call to, I think I might have had 20,000 followers at the time, maybe more, I don't know, I'm just guessing. I said, take the lunar wave clip and send it to your local observatories and get a comment. Well, we only had one response from all these people, and if I remember correctly, it's like somewhere like Norway or somewhere, some observatory did a knee-jerk one-line response that said it's clearly atmosphere. So let's take that apart for a second. We're told, and by the way, I don't agree with anything we're told. So all the we're tolds I'm just about to tell you, I don't accept them, but we are told that the moon is a rock in space just over 250,000 miles away. If anyone out there understands how a camera works, that means the focal plane of my camera on my telescope is focusing at roughly 340,000, something over 250,000 miles away. Okay, that's where my camera comes to focus. You've all seen in calendars where someone takes a picture of a flower in a field. The flower is in perfect focus, but everything in front of it is out of focus. Or the flower is in focus, everything behind it. Or, it's a depth of field thing with cameras. The way I set up, and most people who are going to film in the way I was filming, would mean that I am focused on the moon at roughly, we are told, I don't agree, over 250,000 miles. Things closer to me will be out of focus. So if the lunar wave is simply 60 miles away from me in my atmosphere, yet I'm focused on a thing over you understand what we're doing here. It proves that there's a problem with the explanation that we're being told. But it doesn't end there, because the moon is not 250,000 miles away from it. It is much, 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 much closer. If you want me to bend your ear for a while, I can address the eclipses we just had, which begin to demonstrate that the moon is in fact misdescribed, as is our world, as is space.
I'm going to read one thing before we get into that, because I think it's important for the audience to hear this. Now, I know that you know about the protocols of Zion.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to read something here for the audience, Crow, and I know you're familiar with this, so bear with me. The Goyim are not guided by observations of history, but by theories on how the world is supposed to work. They don't bother to check whether those theories are true or not. So don't trouble yourself with them. He's talking to an audience. Let them amuse themselves until the final hour strikes. Let them organize their beliefs around scientific theories. We are constantly using our media to encourage Goyim to have blind confidence in these theories. The intellectuals, this gets to your point about the folks you had at dinner, the intellectuals of the Goyim will fill their minds with this scientific knowledge without questioning its validity or usefulness. Our agent specialists have carefully determined what type of knowledge the intellectuals receive, and in this way we can steer their minds in the direction we want. Now, this is very important, and I know there's going to be people out there that are going to say, I heard that the protocols of Zion are a hoax and they're fake and all that stuff. I'm not in that camp. I believe it's a very real document, because if you read it, and I have read it, everything that you read in the protocols, well, it's here today.
It's not arguable. Yeah, it's not arguable. Whether or not you wanted to say the document just read is real, we can prove that what it's demonstrating is accurate.
Right. And so the point there, folks, what I was trying to say is that the science that you're given, the science that you're taught, the science that you're indoctrinated with, well, it's doctored. It's not the real deal.
That's right. I always used an example not too long ago to try to get people to consider what you just said. And I used to say this: why do we use base 10 as our number system? Why is base 10? When I first started to make websites in the 90s, I noticed that all the color palettes were represented in hexadecimal, which is base 15. And so when I began to think about that, it began to make me realize that base 10 is just a construct. Is it possible that the reason we count in base 10 is because base 10 prevents us from being all we could be? Why aren't we using base 60, base whatever? Consider that idea for a second. Here's the rub. What we find in this world is that direct observation is the only way to anywhere. If you want to know anything about this world, you have two choices. You can believe a thing you've been told, or you can try to determine it for yourself. The problem here is that, as he just read in the Protocols of Zion, is that you've been convinced that the men in the white lab coats in your textbooks are telling you a true thing. They are not. They are not. They are provably not. Now, I'll address the solar eclipse here, hopefully at some point, to demonstrate to you all that you have been flat out lied to. But here's the real rub. Science is I don't have a word for it. It's a corruption. That's what science is. Science is a corruption. And the problem with telling people this is because they all understand that their refrigerator and their automobile were made with science. And these are great things to have. Our food doesn't rot. And I can go from Rhode Island to California now because I have an automobile and science brought that. Nonetheless, science is a corruption. You will note that every time you turn on your vehicle, out the tailpipe, corruption is spewing. This is science. There is a predecessor to science, which is often referred to as alchemy. You've been taught in your life that alchemy is witchcraft, voodoo, the devil's work, and all this other nonsense. What it is, in fact, is a version of science that seeked to accomplish its tasks within the scope of the natural system. To put this in context for the average mind, a farmer takes a seed and he plants it in the spring. Why? Because the natural system requires the farmer to do that. The farmer cannot take his seed at the winter solstice or Christmas and plant his seed. It will not grow. And it will not grow because the natural system requires that farmer takes his seed and plants it at the appropriate time of year. This is lock, stock, and barrel alchemy. As a matter of fact, almost all alchemical processes were required to start in the spring and were tied to a certain part of the year under the knowledge that everything in this world was here and part of this world. And in this case, they break it to 4 elements. The idea behind the 4 elements, which you can find in many religions to this day, like Tibet, they still use the elemental idea. They can transmute one into the other. In other words, you will never get a thing so noxious or so polluting that it would be a problem for the world. And to illustrate this, if you take water and heat it, the water becomes air, turns into steam, right? That is one of the most basic alchemical processes. Unfortunately, what has happened here is we have been convinced that science is the be-all and end-all. It is not. As a matter of fact, it is a roadblock. As a matter of fact, it will prevent you from being a higher human being if you put all your stock in these ideas. The truth is that alchemy has actually been misused to transmute all our minds. So while the old idea of alchemy was actually a true form of science that was in step with this natural environment, whatever it is, a natural environment that appears to be perfect from our point of view. I would point out men do not make perfect systems, but our natural system appears to be perfect. What's happened here is the very principles of alchemy have been spun back around on us, but what they are transmuting is our minds, you see. But what most people don't understand is that is the end-all goal of alchemy in the first place. You've heard it's turning lead into gold. That's just an aphorism. It's just a foolish path to fool you down. What it's actually there for is to transmute a human mind into what a Christian might call a heavenly thing, or what a Buddhist might call enlightenment. Every tradition in this world has a version of what a higher human being can become to escape this place we call the world. So that was a bit of a wordy response, but there it is.
No, it's excellent. In fact, I did a show that covered that with Michael Joseph. We talked a bit about that and the alchemical process that they are involved in. Crowley, I believe, I'm trying to remember now, I'm not going to get this quote, so I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but his belief was that in order to transform something, you had to actually distort it and break it down.
Right.
And once you distort it, yep. And then what you do is you build it up and you make it better. So you have to destroy it first and then build it up to make it better. And when you take a look around what's going on all around us, I would make an argument that that's exactly what's going on.
It is exactly what's going on. And I'll point out for the record, just to make my point, it appears to me that Crowley was not a great man. It appears to me that he just went around the world collecting work that other people had done. In the work that Crowley did, it was a necessity that they spoke Hebrew or Yiddish, whatever you want to call the Jewish dialect. And there are many people who were born with that language that said he wasn't even proficient at that language. So basically, in my view, and I have read quite a bit of Crowley at this point, that he just went around robbing from Peter and Paul to put together this thing he wanted. You know what it's like? It's a bit like Taekwondo and martial arts. What Taekwondo did was took all the ceremony, the higher mindedness out and left in only the moves that would break a bone. Okay, that's kind of what Crowley did. There's this thing called spagyrics. I have always grown things and grown herbs. In spagyrics, there is a kind of low-level form of alchemy where you make tinctures and stuff out of herbs. But to my amazement, when I first got involved, is the first thing you do is you blacken these herbs down to ash. It's called the Negredo process. So there's what he is talking about in breaking it down. But anyone who's familiar with herbs, here's another example. If you simply dry them and you have fresh herbs on one hand and dry herbs in the other, the dry herbs are much more potent than the fresh herbs in most cases. But the Negredo process, here you've taken these herbs and you've burned them down to ash, and you're thinking, well, in our Western science minds, you've ruined that thing, right? You've destroyed it. You've turned it to carbon. That's not the case. You then take those ashes and you go through alchemical processes and you end up recombining them, the end process being like tinctures and other things that are many times stronger than the initial herb that was used to make it. So this begins to demonstrate both some of the falsehood of science and some of the value in older ideas of alchemy. And I would further point out that any sufficiently old indigenous tradition will intimately tie the idea of elements, the idea of alchemy, directly to a calendar and directly to what we call astrology, which has also been made to be silly and defamed. And I'll address that very quickly. The zodiac is not a joke. You have all been taught from various ways that the zodiac is nonsense, and I'll prove to you right now why it's not. Without the zodiac, which is the 12 signs that band the ecliptic, the path of the sun and moon and planets, we could not place those objects. If we want to place the sun in a year, we require the zodiac to do it. The way it is done is by understanding what sign of the zodiac is behind the sun. So again, you've been misled. You are in fact the Goyim. And that is a derisive term. Yeah. And what that tells you is there are people here who know a truer way, a more natural way, but it's been deprived you. And you've been fed this science. I can't call it nonsense. It's a trap, man. It's such a mind trap. We have vehicles. We have all these things that were brought by science. But the truth is, science is a roadblock. It will give you corruption. It will give you all these things, but there was a better way, and we were deprived of that better way.
Now, you wanted to talk about the eclipse?
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you get into that?
So I just wrote another article for the Flat Earth Revival magazine, and just for the record, I belong to no groups. I'm not a member of the Flat Earth, but the Flat Earth Revival magazine is going to be the first print magazine for that community, which I appreciate because they are challenging this natural environment. But here's what I was offered. I could write carte blanche and have final edit. And so in this world of censorship, I said I'm in. Anyhow, I just finished an article which will go live in the next edition, which talks about the solar eclipse work I did. When I was back in San Diego, I filmed every lunar and solar eclipse to include transits of Venus across the face of the sun, or supposed Venus. The last thing I filmed, or one of the last major things I filmed before I left San Diego, was a solar eclipse. And here's what I did. I got a plan together, which was this. I will take all this high-end equipment, full spectrum cameras, high-end visual spectrum solar cameras, 8-inch scope, 11-inch scope, 800 millimeter telephoto lens with a doubler, solar filters, no solar filters, all these things I had at my disposal to do one thing, to detect the moon approaching the sun before the eclipse begins. We are told that the sun is 93 million miles away from us and an infinite light source. We are told that the moon is over 250,000 miles away in a rock in space. What this means by that model is that this thing that's only 250,000 miles away is backlit 93 million miles away by an infinite light source, which is the brightest thing we know. Quick thing about light. I was a stagehand almost all the way through the 90s, a traveling roadie, had much to do with many lighting people who taught me a lot of things. I know these things that I'm about to tell you to be true from direct observation. If you take a point source light, which a better term is a spotlight, and you put it on a person, the shadow on the wall will be a certain size. If you move that spotlight closer to the person, the shadow will grow larger. This is proven by physics, modern science, and my direct observation. If you take what is called an infinite source light, like the sun, and put it on a person, it does not matter the position of that light. The object casting the shadow will always cast a shadow the size of the object casting it. Okay? We're told by science that the sun is that infinite light source that I just described last there. Get back to me filming with all those tools in San Diego. I couldn't detect the moon. As a matter of fact, what we're told is the moon began to cover the sun, and that black little blacked out portion of the sun happens, you still can't detect the moon. After the whole eclipse is over, you still can't detect the moon. So fast forward to the full solar eclipse that we just had in 2017, and I'm on the East Coast, and here I am with a full spectrum camera on an 11-inch telescope, and I'm going to confirm once and for all, which I do. You cannot detect the moon, no matter what you do. Light obliteration, any number of ways, any number of tools, to include filming an IR, UV, and visual spectrum, all of which I did. You cannot detect what is called a rock in space, the moon, before it gets to the eclipse, as it is supposedly eclipsing, and after it leaves the eclipse, the moon plays no role in solar eclipses. Something else is going on there, but there's more. Of course, there's more. Let's get back to the infinite light source. An infinite light source, which the sun is, will cast a shadow the size of the object casting it. We were told during this last eclipse that the shadow being cast on the Earth was 70 miles wide. Guess what, girls and boys? That tells us the size of the object that was eclipsing the sun. It's roughly 70 miles across. Now we get into a whole other set of problems, because if an object roughly 70 miles across covered the sun, now we've got a big problem. Am I correct in asserting, and I have asserted this for a long time, that the sun is much closer than we think it is, or is it just this, distance game where it just happens to be the exact right size to cover the sun? Well, plenty of statisticians have used hard-cold math, yes, in our base 10, but nonetheless, to prove that it is beyond the realm of possibility that randomly this thing the size of the moon can perfectly block something 400 times more distance called the sun. So we have that to consider. Here's my assertion. The sun and moon are lights. All the planets up there are lights. I know people want more detail than that, but that is what we can know for sure right now without leading people's minds into illusion. They are likely much, much, much closer than we have been told, and likely the sun and moon are at similar distances from us. And to top it off, there is this old Indian notion of the nodes in their form of astronomy. That may well be what we are seeing when a solar eclipse happens. And again, it has nothing to do with the moon. So there's all that.
What do you think of Rahu?
Yeah, I think that's where the eyes need to go right now. I can't call myself an expert on this because I haven't spent a sufficient amount of time. I've watched other people cover it. I think it has legs. And even if it doesn't have legs, I think it's the path that needs walking. I think if we want to understand that we need to wake up, grow up, understand that the human mind has been lowered to infantile levels over the last 3 generations, which, if that is a correct assumption, which I think I've more than demonstrated, we need to go back in time to these older ideas, to these very, very, the oldest ideas we can get, and try to use those as benchmarks as a way to move forward, to properly redefine. And notice how I'm saying research, redefine. It's even implied in our language that
right.
These things were truly known at one point. So,
yeah. So let me ask this. You mentioned the flat Earth. So what are your thoughts on the flat Earth theory? My take on it is, and I've mentioned this in another show, that I believe the narrative was intentionally inserted into the mass consciousness, into the mass dialogue. We can argue till the cows come home who did it and why it was done. But it certainly has played a large, large part in questioning and pushing back on the heliocentric model. So what are your thoughts about the flat Earth theory?
I agree with you. It was put together so that trouble could be caused by people who wanted to question our environment. I don't belong to any group. I never will. And my YouTube channel at this point demonstrates why you don't want to centralize and belong to a group. My YouTube channel is basically ruined right now. I'm locked out with 80,000 people in that community who would like to participate. But let's get back to the question at hand. The Flat Earth movement, I think the original one's over a couple hundred years old, so you can see, what's going on here. Anytime you form a group, it only takes 1 or 2 people to come in and discombobulate, cause trouble, mislead, these kinds of things. That's what the Flat Earth movement was put together for. But that does not take away from all the people who have honestly become a part of that and are honestly trying to reassess our world. And that's why I do things like Write for Flat Earth independently. Because these people are doing a thing that needs being done. Our world is misdescribed. Space is misdescribed. Your sun and moon are misdescribed. I have proved these things to my own mind, and I've tried to demonstrate it out to a larger audience. So at the end of the day, here's what I can tell you. our world is misdescribed. If that is an accurate statement, there is likely land masses out there that you know nothing of. I have used the example of the Mercator projection before to demonstrate to people that we can prove the world is misdescribed. We're told that there are all these images of Earth from space. And just to be clear before I say any of what I'm about to, there is not an image of anything from space. Not a planet, not our world, not anything. There has never been an image of anything taken from space. We're told that Apollo 16 and 17 pointed a Hasselblad out their little capsule while they're in space and took an image of Earth. Those images are unarguably proven phony. Anyone can go out there and take them both, set them side by side, and notice that the land masses don't jive, the sizes are wrong, but there's more. In this Apollo 17, they cited the time that these three images were snapped back to back to back. Someone simply rolled the clock forward to show that the wrong part of the Earth is lit. In terms of the 2002 supposed blue marble image, what that was used for was mass delusion. It was put on the 2007 iPhone release as wallpaper to indoctrinate all the minds into that phony image. We know the name of the artist who made that image. His name is Simmons. He's on the record as having stated something to the effect, NASA gave me data and I made this image to look what I thought the Earth should look like. Not only that, there's been a million clips done to show the cloning of clouds on most of these images. To get back to our world, if I am correct in asserting to you that our world is misdescribed, it is likely there are land masses you know nothing of. And you can arrive at that by taking what's called a Mercator projection map. That was on every wall of every school in this world. And here's the story behind Mercator projection. What a Mercator projection map, we are told, is something that was handy for the nautical days of sea captains. It has these straight lines called rum lines, which allowed navigation to happen. Okay, that's why we're told it happened. But here is the rub. When you move away from the equator on a Mercator projection, you get crazy distortion, so bad that by the time you've reached the poles, the distortion is said to be infinite. In other words, what we are told is the poles would be infinitely big. That's what a Mercator projection map does. People have accused the European families of using Mercator projection because it makes their tiny nations appear bigger when compared to the massive third world nations. But that's not even the rub. Here is the rub. Take a Peters projection, a Peters projection, and a Mercator projection, and there are many more. Put them side by side by side, and you will notice immediately they are not even close to each other. So a logical mind can only say one thing. None of these are correct. But now let's go back to the Apollo images. If we're truly in the space age, the day the first image was snapped of Earth, the problem of projecting a map of the world went away in that one snapshot, so you can see the construct of it.
So what are your thoughts, Crow, about the depiction of the North Pole in ancient maps as being something very, very different than what we are shown? As an example, many who are looking into the research know about Hyperborea, which, of course, the mainstream will say is nothing more than mythology. But Hyperborea is what would be the North Pole, but it's very different. It's not ice and snow. It's not a big ice cap sitting on top of Earth, but it's four continents. And in the center of those four continents is a giant mountain. Many will refer to it as Mount Meru. So what do you think about the North Pole? Are we being lied to with that as well?
From my point of view, there's no North Pole. That's just likely the center of things. So like the Idris tree or Idril, the tree, or Mount Meru from Buddhism, these ideas would reflect that kind of, it's the center of it. In other words, if you were at what we call the North Pole and traveled in any direction, you would be going south.
Right.
It's not, you couldn't come back around the world to end up there again. The key to much of this is the South, what's called the South Pole, named after all these rulers, where Prince William goes down there to show you he's standing at that stupid South Pole ball. The Ring of Truth is in none of it. And I've called out Anthony Bourdain a few times. He's a proud member of CNN now, and he recently took a film crew down to commiserate on how nobody respects science. And I have more than once said, Mr. Bourdain, it's not that at all. We're tired of scientism. We're tired of the lies. And we understand your supposed trip to the South Pole or Antarctica is the key. We know. We know that there's a reason that 52 nations guard that border. We know that we've been told that there's more land beyond the South Pole than both the United States and Europe put together, and all this other hullabaloo we've been told. We know the key is there, and we know you're preventing people from going there. There will come a time, all you people listening, there will come a time. There's one true thing in this world, and that's change. In the same way that I set up my telescope next to a tree for those 4 years that I filmed, I one day looked at that tree and it told me more about my world than I had ever considered for myself, because I realized every time I came out to set up my telescope, that tree had changed. It had grown. And I looked around me at all the people and realized they had not. There were people with the same religious doctrine that they had when they were 16, when they were 50. And I realized that tree was informing me. Change is the thing. That tree will continue to grow. And there's another true thing about this place. Any constructed thing built or created will see its end. There will come a time. It doesn't matter what we do or what we don't do or what we try to accomplish or we won't. There will come a time. Every constructed thing has its end, and change is the current in this place we exist.
What they do, taking a look at the North Pole and the South Pole, Crow, is they define it as pretty much a frozen tundra. There's nothing to see there. So what happens is that takes everybody's attention away from these places. So there's nothing there. It's not worth looking at or researching. It's the same thing they did with the moon, right? Oh, it's just a big floating gray rock in the sky, right? So that's why we didn't go back. We don't go back there anymore, because it's just a big rock. Why go back to a big rock? It's interesting how they go about this too, because once you understand their methods, it's pretty easy to figure out exactly what they're doing.
All you need is a higher mind. I just, like a week and a half ago, went back and looked at Operation High Jump Hollywood nonsense. And the first part of the message is, here's the mighty American Navy, and they almost died. They can't even make it down there. So, goes without saying, you can't even try. But anyhow, they make it down there. But what's interesting about that is when they're taking these supposed big honking planes with their little JATO jet things they put on the prop planes, they actually claim they're finding an area larger than the United States and Europe with infinitely more resources that we never knew about. I mean, when's the last time everyone heard about all these resources? But then they show all these areas that are not frozen in that old 50s movie. That's not the message you get now. The message you get now is, you probably couldn't even make it down there. If you did, why would you? There's only one season you can even exist because it's so nasty. And then we have our little penguin friends, don't we, that tell us so much. I remember when the penguins were washing up on the shore of Fiji, like a decade ago, and the big thing was, well, these poor penguins, we've got to save them because clearly a storm knocked them. No, the Fijians will tell you they show up every year. It's all a construct, man. The only place you can find a penguin is in Antarctica. It goes on and on and on. Truer words were never spoken than what you read from the Protocols of Zion. It is exactly why everywhere I go, I say the belief is the enemy of knowing. And I said those words long before I had ever touched the Protocols of Zion. But there they are, echoed over why, in fact, belief is the enemy of knowing. Because if you want to be a diaper-wearing, lower-minded, animalistic, egocentric, materialistic person, well, go to Walmart today. Pay for a Hollywood movie, turn on your television, because that's what it's all there for, baby. And if you want to be a higher-minded person, after about a year, you will find you're immune to programming on some level.
That's the truth. Once you step into the arena of truth and you start doing research on whatever it is, it opens up additional roads and other avenues in which you're going to venture down. And once you start down that path, there is no looking back. There's no, you know what? I'm going to go back to sleep.
No.
It just does not happen. I've never spoken to anybody who's doing the work that you're doing, or I'm doing. There's tons of us out there. And anytime I've ever had that conversation, they've said, there's no going back. Once you realize what's going on, you just keep going forward. Let me ask you this now. You mentioned about your YouTube channel, and some may not be aware of what happened. So what did happen with your YouTube channel?
Are you posting this content on, I don't want to harm you. Are you posting this content on YouTube?
Yeah.
Then I'm going to say the V word, and you can either define it or not define it.
We could say Nevada if you want.
Okay. The big Nevada event that we just came through, the re-echo of the events of 9/11. I covered that as the last clip up on my YouTube channel within 2 days on the 7th, of course, Zayin, the mind weapon. I was hit with a strike on a very old video I did with Randy from Houston. Anyone who knows Randy from Houston, he's about the most pleasurable, nice manual. I mean, it was an innocuous video, but it had false shooting in the title. A day later, I got another strike and I was locked out. That one was titled Nobody Died, Nobody Got Hurt. They didn't touch the Nevada video. Other people downloaded the Nevada video and uploaded it, and they got strikes. So that is still sitting there. I am now locked out of my YouTube channel. They put strikes on videos that have been running, I think, over 2 years. And there are nearly 80,000 people over there in my community who want to participate. What this is, or what I have labeled this, was Dave J came in to commiserate when he saw they were going to take me out, because he's been taken out 10 times, literally, 10th YouTube channel. And he said, yep. I'm sorry, Crow, this is nothing better than a modern day book burning. And as the day went on, I kept thinking about that, and it dawned on me all at once, that is freaking perfect modern day book burning. And here's why. Every time you are programmed, there is a modicum of mind warp, branding, marketing brought to bear. Here's an example. Every time there's a false shooting, they'll use the word active shooter, because that is a branding mechanism. That is a Pavlovian catchphrase. In the same way the dog salivates when the bell rings, that's what's being done to you, just so you know. Right. So I said, let's turnabout's fair play. I branded what the censorship is doing as the modern day book burning, because first of all, everyone knows what a book burning is from history, and they know it's bad. And to top it off, it accurately reflects what they're doing. In the case of my channel, if they wipe it off the map, they're removing a historical record of 4 years of astronomical observation, among other things. But the real truth is any person who puts any content up on any social media platform, imagine this, 300 years from now, someone comes back to look at any one of these things, anyone. I don't care if it's a clip of a hula hoop, someone playing with a hula. It is an accurate historical representation of that moment in time. To remove that is no better than burning books. It's actually worse, because, I mean, we're talking about video and sound and all these other things that you can't quite get into a book. You can describe things in a book. So, that's why I started the meme, the modern day book burning.
Where do you stand now? I mean, do they have you in some kind of holding pattern? In other words, you have to wait a certain amount of days before you come back, or how does that work?
So I'm supposed to be locked out for 2 weeks, right? So here's what actually happens. I'm at 2 weeks and 3 days, and I still can't get past that pink page that tells you you're locked out. But I put out a call that anyone with a moderate community, I want to come on your show and talk. We need to decentralize. We need to come together here. Don't care if you're about aliens. Don't care if you're not. Don't care religion, race, any of it. Let's come together here. So I'm on Freeman TV. While I am being interviewed on Freeman TV, another strike comes on a NASA clip where and get this. I have been so careful on my channel to go to Wiki Commons and only make my own content and take things that are not copyrighted. They give me a copyright strike on me demonstrating why astronauts on the ISS is a complete construct. And there's the rub. All NASA video, if you look in Wiki Commons, it'll tell you all NASA video is copyright free unless otherwise stated. So I lifted that video from Wiki Commons, and while I'm being interviewed on Freeman TV, I get this other copyright strike. So I don't know whether that means I'm done. That's a third strike, but it's copyright, and sometimes you can get copyright. I don't know how it works, but here's the other thing. I'm on ODD TV the other day. He gets struck while we're on the air on an old clip covering Sandy hoax. To top it off, the conspiracy horsemen, these ex-pro wrestlers, had me on when I put out my call to go on. Skype fails. It's just been one thing after another that, I mean, I suppose you could say you're paranoid, Crow, but I'm really not. I'm a realist. And, you know, it's one thing to be doing research and say 5 times this is coincidence. By the time you've said this is coincidence 100 times, it's probably not coincidence, and that sets aside the fact that I do not believe in coincidence. So there's all that.
Yeah, so no, and the thing with YouTube is, and for folks who don't know, for those of us that do have channels, we do know, trying to contact them is very difficult. It's like you're sending an email or response to a phantom somewhere.
To the president, right?
They're very unresponsive, and you have no idea whether they're actually looking at or reviewing something that you are countering. As an example, if there's a copyright strike, you have the ability to go back and say, I don't believe that this is correct. It's really amazing. It's it's like I said, it's like a phantom organization. And every once in a while they throw a channel a bone and they'll lift a copyright strike. But it's happening across the board.
Let's put this out on the table. Google was partially funded by the CIA. And for anyone listening who doesn't have a clue, I will tell you some very true words right now. Listen up. Whenever you are given free services, you are the product. What Facebook, what Google were from the get-go was data collection mechanisms. They have algorithms that are so powerful now, it gives them a time machine. They can predict the outcome of certain events in the future to a 98 or 99% certainty. They literally have been given a time machine from the massive amount of worldwide data they have been given. That's all there is to it. In terms of running ads, there was a time actually before I came, I think I set up on 2013, when people were making a decent living putting up YouTube videos and collecting ad revenue. Well, before I came on, it changed. By the time I came on, if I posted content all the time, I might make a couple $100 a month or something like that. Sometimes maybe it was more, like maybe if the lunar wave went up and I got a lot of hits. But you got to realize the original lunar wave footage still only has something like 700,000 hits. I don't know what it is exactly, and I can't look now. But well, I guess I could from a different browser. I could just see it posted. Think of all the hula hoop videos where there's 40 million hits. You know, it's kind of a joke. There's not a country with an internet connection that hasn't heard of the lunar wave. But what is going on here is to run ads on Google, you got to use AdSense. AdSense is controlled lock, stock, and barrel, and probably a hidden subsidiary. Well, certainly a hidden subsidiary, or actually an organ of Google.
Oh, it is an organ of Google, yeah.
Yeah. So you know, my first corporate job on the internet, as the internet was new, I was the guy bringing some of the first video to banner ads. We were figuring out how we could run video at 3 frames a second, which isn't exactly video, down a phone line. Okay. Back in those days, I was working for a place that was doing the initial banner ads, having no idea where this is go. Back to Google. What you have there is the fox in charge of the hen house. Not only do you not know the value of an ad because Google is telling you the value of an ad, there's no way to confirm that. You now have Google counting the hits and impressions, so you have no way to know. In the same way that I could say, I don't believe I only have 80,000 followers. You tell me I've lost 30,000 over there's no way to verify it. So they could be lying about the hit count and impressions on any given ad. They can lie about the value of an ad. And to top it off, a channel like mine with 80,000 subs, I'm lucky if I clear $200 in a month. I mean, it's almost not worth the point, to the point where I hired a third party to actually serve my ads because they have direct contact with Google. And the idea there was that they could give me some protection from Google.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, look where I am now. And they're up against any third party that's working with Google now is up against a rock and a hard place. It's basically David and Goliath, but Goliath is the size of 1,000 Goliaths.
Right.
And David doesn't have a slingshot.
Yeah. No, it really is very, very difficult. And the problem is, you're on their platform with their terms and conditions, and their terms and conditions are very nebulous, and they're very ambiguous intentionally so that it can be interpreted at the time in which they wish to interpret something.
Right. I can address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we, you and I have both been saying the same thing. So when I first got my first strike, it's nebulous like that. I put out more clips saying I defy anyone, even a bright person, to read the violations and understand it. You can't. So now what they have charged me with to lock me out of my site is bullying. So I went on my last show and I said, bullying my butt. I said, if I have bullied someone, then there's an injured party. Produce your injured party.
That's right.
And they cannot produce an injured party because actually the truth of what has happened here is I have challenged the nonsense mainstream narrative that is destroying our world for the average person. For the oligarchs or the special families, this place is going to be a paradise. There's going to be a bunch of monkeys out there doing all the work, and they are going to be living like utopian Olympians. That's where this heads. But again, I say, hey, YouTube, this is Crrow777. Hey, Google, you told me I'm a bully. Produce your injured party. What I assert is that you are bullying me, that you have locked me out of a community of 80,000 people who want to communicate. You are burning books, which are records of historical events that have happened in our time, and I am challenging you right now, prove that I have bullied anyone. Produce your injured party.
Yeah, what they're doing to us is harassing us, is what they're doing.
That's right.
Right. So they're harassing us, and we've all been touched by it. My channel has been, knock on wood, okay so far. I even have a Nevada discussion up there, roundtable with Sophia Smallstorm and company, and I was waiting to see how long it would be up before, they would send me a little memo. But it's still there, and it's still racking up the hits, so that's good.
Did you say the V word?
Yeah, in the title, yeah.
So here's what we know for certain. I have friends that are black hats. I have friends that are in the corporate world who are absolutely in the know about these things. This is what happened. On the tail of the Nevada event that we can't name, that is the re-echoing, the modern day 9/11, Facebook and Google both rewrote the algorithms for their platform. For the non-technical people, what it basically means is these two massive giants of information purveyance on the internet rewrote their computer code to catch every conversation, vocal, text, otherwise, about the V word, the Nevada event. That's what they did. What does that tell you? Tells you something big. If you can just put down that beer for a second and think about it, what does that tell you? And this is what's going on now. And I'll point out one more thing before I shut up. The United States is a corporation. The United States of America does not exist. That's why we say the U.S. Navy, not the USA Navy, okay? The United States is a corporation. The laws of free speech imply that your government cannot infringe on your freedom of expression, your free speech, okay? I would ask, if our government is a corporation, how are they any different from Google? What's going on here is Google is hiding behind this nonsensical agreement they force you into to get in a public forum, and they're hiding behind the shield of corporation. Here's the rub. We have now reached a time where there is no major purveyance of information that is not owned by a corporation. So the times, while they appear to have changed, they really haven't, because your government is a corporation. What we have now is corporations determining what we can talk about and what we cannot. And I will point out, you're listening to a channel who's in my age group. You're looking at listening to two men who can remember a time before this. This is the whole idea behind the book Animal Farm, which shows the tactics that will be employed. The animals in that book could not remember 4 years prior, which allowed their whole world to be shifted. What's going on here is your freedom of speech and expression and thought have come under direct attack by corporations acting like they're not government. If you lose your freedom of expression, your freedom of speech and thought, and you do not stand up now, you're no better than the damn sheep in Animal Farm, but setting that aside, you will have surrendered your freedom. Within a short generation, this world will be a different place. You'll do things like go to the ATM, and the ATM will not give you money because your car registration is not up to date or some other nonsense. But more than that, if you have children, if you know people that are under 30 years old, the life they are about to lead will basically be a life of slavery. Because the one thing that's truly distinctly changes the difference between the animal world and the human world is freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and freedom of speech. Without those things, the ideas that human minds can create are without a transportation mechanism.
I'm going to say, Crow, and I've said this before, within 20 years, the future 20 years from now is going to look like something that we would never recognize today. And that's what people don't understand. It's not 100 years away. It's not 500 years away. You're talking about, in my view, 2 decades.
I think less, but go ahead.
It's going to be less. As time goes on, more and more is going to be taken away, and more change is going to take place. But what I'm saying is, if you were able to leap ahead 20 years from now, you won't recognize the place.
That's right. That is right. You know, there's allegory in this world for anyone with an eye to see or an ear that can still hear in this infantile mindset we have become, wrapped up in the cult of personality and television and entertainment. You know, we don't have culture in the United States, I'm sorry to tell you. We have some people that like television and movies. That's what we have.
Right.
That's what this place is. And until you come to the realization, then you're between a rock and a hard place. My estimation is that if something doesn't change big here, within 3 years, you are already going to see what you might equate the construct of Nazi Germany with. You're already being tracked by your credit cards and ATM cards. That little chip that's in there, they're tracking you. The SMART IDs put in place by the Department of Homeland Security, Der Fatherland Security Heil, have already set the bridge work. But my guess is that if people do not stand and refuse to accept this, that within 3 years, we're going to be seeing states demanding passports for an American citizen to go from one state to the other. We will begin to see these types of things. You see, here's the problem. Too many of us can see without the glasses, to reference They Live. And I would point out that I just posted on my Twitter account today the sign-off for television back in the day when at midnight, in the 60s and 70s at midnight, your television would sign off with the Star-Spangled Banner or some other nonsense. I put up the clip that shows verbatim the same language echoed in the movie They Live was encoded into the Star-Spangled Banner sign-off that hit every American mind that watched it. Obey, consume, do not question your government. If you do not understand there's an end game here, simply look at 9/11. We had twin towers. What's standing there now? One World building, whatever it's called. It is the most case-hardened bunker building that ever existed, and it is the allegory, one-to-one allegory for this world. If you do not stand up and simply refuse to accept nonsense, that our world is going to be basically a slave-based population, which will have an infinitely more difficult time changing things. Right now, we have a window. It's simple. Don't accept it. You get censored, you say, not so fast. I'm a human being. No one takes my natural right of free speech, free thought. These are the things that matter at this moment, and corporation is about to stomp us all out.
Well, the problem we have is that many people define freedom as being able to drive down to Walmart and to go out to a fast food place to get a hamburger. That's how they define freedom. They don't really understand what it is, Crow, and that's what we're up against.
Right.
That's why when we talk about this stuff, people say, what do you mean I'm not free? I can leave my house, I can get in my car, I can drive down the road, I can...
No, they can, and we can demonstrate it. First of all, you got to give away a 30-year income, which isn't even legal. Secondarily, you got to follow an endless litany of laws that only compel you to act because of the straw man corporation that was set up against your name the day you were born. And if you don't understand that to be true, look at your driver's license. It's in all capital letters. Do you write your name in all capital letters? What that mechanism is done is because they cannot infringe on a human being's freedom of choice. So they created this straw man. If you give power to that straw man, now you can be compelled to do things. You have never known freedom in your existence, but the freedom that you have known, being able to go to Walmart or have a burger, let me tell you something, even that will change pretty quickly. But here's the rub. In the same way I told you science is a corruption, the way we exist as persons in this community is a corruption as well. A human lifetime can be so much more than you have been allowed to know. You could know people with mental abilities that could stagger you. I have met them. I have met people that let me know I'm still trying to take off my diapers. The human mind is an amazing thing, and this whole game is basically at the root of it about crunching the human mind down to an infantile level, because an unprogrammable human mind is one simple thing. It's a higher mind. It's a higher human mind. That mind cannot be fooled. In the same way, a child cannot lie to me because I will hear that the ring of truth doesn't exist. A higher human mind cannot be programmed. And we're all being programmed right now.
Well, that's a great segue into Tavistock. You want to talk about Tavistock a little bit?
Certainly. What would you like to cover?
Well, I have done a number of shows on the McCartney conspiracy, and what is important about the McCartney conspiracy is the fact that Tavistock, British intelligence, and the CIA, but especially Tavistock and the British intelligence, are heavily involved in the music and entertainment industry. The Beatles are a creation of Tavistock. They were a Tavistock project. And they took the most popular, or one of the most popular entertainers and musicians of the time at the height of their popularity, or his popularity, in 1966. Swapped them out in 1967. And from that point on, for 50 plus years, you have been looking at an imposter.
That's right.
Right? So what you have to understand is the psyop and the techniques that are involved and how they are manipulating the mass consciousness and how they are putting the mind control and the mind manipulation in place. Tavistock has been in this game for a very long time.
Yes.
And, if you go onto Wikipedia, it has this like really generic, nice description of what Tavistock is all about. But Tavistock is all about social engineering and mind control, correct?
That's why they exist, and we can give real examples right here. I mean, think about what it means to swap out Paul McCartney. If you're a person that wants to argue about that, I think you need to go find a new forum because you're not quite caught up. You're maybe adding and subtracting, and we're doing a little algebra here. It's about like that, and actually we're doing a little calculus. So if you don't understand, I'm telling you why you don't understand. What they did is they took one of the most popular faces in the world, and they said, presto changeo. They swapped them right in front of your eyes. But let's look at a little modern day Tavistock work that the average person can look at and understand. Tavistock has final edit on all media. That's all there is to it. They have what's called advisors in Hollywood. Jason and I just did a show that demonstrates that these 30-something geeks come up with simple language shows. It gets accepted at some point, goes to producers and directors. They get involved. It's still very simplistically put together at that point. Right before they're going to go actually film it or put it together, these guys called advisors come in. You know who those advisors are? On a children's show, they are Tavistock-provided psychologists, children's psychologists, all right? These guys put the programming in last step as it goes to film, which could imply for, many who want to dissect it, that there are many directors out there who probably don't even really understand fully what's going on. But let's take one of the most popular shows to demonstrate to you the lowering of the human mind into infantile levels. Big Bang. Not many shows out there have a bigger audience than Big Bang. You're being presented with the best of us, the best and the brightest. These guys are PhDs. Sheldon Cooper on that show is a rare mind. There might be 2 or 3 of them alive at any time, you're told. What are they into? Well, they're into comic books. They sleep with Ewok bears. They have Star Trek. Their chief concern in the year is to make it to Comic-Con. Their chief concern is to tell us how great the movie or the TV show Star Trek was. Their chief concern is to make an episode that, oh my God, the next Star Wars is coming out. We're so excited. This is the lowering of a human mind. These are things that do not matter. And the best and the brightest of us, my father was a PhD. And let me tell you something. I met all his friends when I was a kid. Probably the vocabulary you hear now, I owe to my father. One of the most educated people I ever met. His friends, they were not sleeping with Ewoks. They were not collecting comic books. These were individuals who were truly on an educational bent. They were higher-minded people, and that's a generation behind me. And now look what we've become. But the main spiel here is look at Big Bang. You want to know how your mind's being lowered? You're being showed examples that you then accept. And the one true thing about TV is the habitual user, their right mind becomes more active. Their neocortex, the higher mind, shuts down. They go into their reptilian mind. Endorphins are released, which is no different than opiates. And the lower reptilian mind cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. There it is. That's how you're programmed. And this sets aside all the things we've just covered, like the hertz rate on your television, which basically tells you how many times per second your screen is refreshing. Modern TV, some of them up over 120 times. 120 times that thing is refreshing in your face. All those carrier signals are carrying frequency, color, any number of things. We're starting to work on that now, where we're going to try to film a high refresh rate at 5 times the speed it's presented and show what's in the carrier signal to people. But go look at the movie They Live. There are people out there trying to show that's more of a documentary than anything, setting the alien thing aside.
I have a quote, Crow, from Chris Hedges, and I always love this quote because it really encapsulates everything that we've been talking about. We now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the press destroys information, religion destroys morals, and our banks destroy the economy.
There it is, man. Truer words were never spoken. Those words are as true as these other words I say are the truest words I've ever spoken, attributed to Bonaparte. History is a lie agreed upon. Whether or not there was a man named Bonaparte, what you just said, I mean, we should all tattoo it on our chest. No, not really. I'm just saying, but there's a billboard for you.
Now, I'm going to ask you this question, and I promise what we'll do is we'll wrap up here soon because we've been talking for a while, and I don't want to bend your ear, but I had a discussion with Max Egan, I guess 4 or 5 months ago, maybe 3 months ago. I don't remember. But I asked Max whether, from his perspective, whether he was seeing a true awakening, which means an exponential rate and pace increase in people waking up to what's going on in the world. And Max said to me that he was not seeing an awakening, but an awareness. So there's a big difference between being awakened
Yes.
and just being aware of stuff. So
That's
what is
right.
your take? Is there an awakening or is it just an awareness?
For whatever reason, which I can't tell you why, how, or even when, I kind of mark it around the turn of the last century when we came into the 2000s, right around the time we had 9/11, of course, in the fall, which has a direct correlation to the fall of the human mind. Here's what I will say. I'm not awake. If I was awake, you and I wouldn't need to have this conversation, or I wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd probably be more concerned with how to get away from this place. Because in my view, you don't leave this place with your body. I don't think anything leaves what we call low Earth orbit or our atmosphere, man or machine. I think he's right. I think we do see an awareness. But you see, that old tired cliche from probably China is every journey starts with a single step. So I guess the real question becomes, where are we? Sometimes in my mind's eye, I imagine how many lights, little candle lights, are out in the field in front of me. Each one of those lights I can see is a human being that has become aware, that is ready to move away from this illusion. And I say to myself, is it possible that there are millions of lights in this field that I see in my mind's eye, or is it possible that I just can't see far enough to know? The truth is that I can't see far enough to know. The truth is I can only measure it by things like every internet connection country seems to know about the lunar wave, seems to be aware of my brand and the things that I have talked about. To me, this is a good indicator that there are many lights in the field that I can see in my mind's eye. That's the best I can do, and it brings us back to where we always are. We want more detail. We want more information. But before I forget, you had pointed out with the McCartney thing that people want the details, like what was his real name? This is what I would like to point out to people. There's another old cliche that I will use here. The devil is in the details. That is a true thing. And whether you're a religious person or you're not, it matters not. The idea of what's being said is what matters. The devil is truly in the details. And if you set out to find the devil, the details, you will find him. And this is how these nonsensical Nevada events and all these other things work, is they put out these mysterious mind hooks called details that will never resolve, that will never get you any closer. In the same way, if you wanted to see what an entire big tree looked like and you kept asking to be handed a leaf and you kept looking at the leaf going, oh, wow, man, check this. Okay, give me another leaf. You will never, ever see the entire tree for those details. What you have to do is get into your higher mind, fly up to 50,000 feet, look back down and see it all. See, at that point, the details no longer matter. When this nonsensical Nevada thing happened, it took me all of about a millisecond to understand the truth of what had just happened. It's a bit like as I glanced out the window, the sky flashed red for a second, and I knew instantly. I didn't need a single detail. I went onto my website, and all the people in the forum were confused and scared, and God, did all these people just truly get butchered, and it was a horrible thing for me to see.
Yeah, it's like the person that is hunkered over their desk and they see 3 dots, and that's all they see is 3 dots. And then when they pick their head up, if they ever pick their head up, they see that there's a million dots.
That's right.
You know, so yeah, this is very, very interesting, and you were spot on. You have to rise above. You have to take a look at this from a higher level and look down at it, and so you can see the connection points. Because if you're down in the weeds, you're never going to see the connection points. And you're exactly right, Crow. That's what they do. They just keep putting shit out there. Right. So that you can go off on a wild goose chase. It's like in that Nevada event recently, I guess a few days ago, somebody had put a video up of, the ambulances outside of Hooters. And I had somebody email me and said, Mike, did you see the video of the ambulances outside of Hooters? I said, be very careful with that stuff, because what they're doing right now is now they want you to go down that road.
That's right.
Stop doing that. What you have to understand is, like you said, pick yourself up, take a look at it from the top down so that you can get a better view, a better perspective of all of the various things that are going on down there. And then you can conclude what many of us have concluded, that that event was a staged event. I want to get your opinion on something else, because we hadn't touched on it, and probably some of the audience is probably thinking, well, what does Crow think about the California fires?
Why, as many know, I grew up in San Diego, California. I can tell you flat out that there are times when the fires are so severe that they're creating their own weather pattern, and it's a bit like imagining hell. I have seen these things, but here's the rub. By the time I left to come to the East Coast in 2015, there was another fire thing going on. And I went into a 7-Eleven to get gas, and there were people in there talking about it. There was an African-American girl. I think she was probably in her 20s. She was talking to a Hispanic man who was a bit older. There was an older white guy there, and there was a lady, not sure of her race. And the only reason I'm pointing out race is to show that this had spread across all the little walks, and these people were in here talking about how they were pretty sure that some of the fires had been started. Now, to back up the story, what was being presented on like CNN was that there was 4 fire storms in Southern California. What was actually going on is there was one fire, Lord knows how it started, that would probably fit that description. The other 3, they were controlled burns. As a matter of fact, in the footage that they were showing on the national news, for anyone who grew up in the areas where this goes on, you could see the fire breaks on either side of the fire they were showing you, which let us all know that it was a controlled burn. So this is the real problem with details. You see, if you want to dig into that, at the base of it, there's a real fire going on. You don't know. You can't prove how that real one was started. But then they're passing off 3 controlled burns to pump up the story.
Yeah.
You see, this is what goes on. I'll point out, even our language, this is so insidious that even our language is contributing to this. When you're taught to spell when you're in 3rd grade. You are, in fact, taught to spell, just at a very low level. And it is magic. If I say words to you, I can take a thing that didn't exist and plant it in your mind. I do it all the time as an example. I'll do it right now. Green cube. Think of a green cube. Everyone listening to me right now, think of a green cube. That's magic. That's a spell. I just cast a spell. I took a thing that didn't exist and I put it into your mind. You didn't want it or ask for it. You didn't have an easy way to block it out. The majority of people out there thought of a green cube. That's harmless. You see, but the point I'm making here is about imagination. Imagination is such a critical thing. When used alchemically, misused against you, your imagination will become your mortal enemy, ensuring you exist in this reality in a dreamlike state of illusion where there is no reality to your life, any of it. That's done by your imagination. But by the same token, in ancient cultures that had ideas of enlightenment, imagination is the final step. They imagine their way free of this 3D reality. So you see, in the same way alchemy is this true natural system, it can be misused. It's done every day. What I would point out to you, that getting into your higher mind requires you to take back your mental facilities. And it almost, I don't want to say the words imagination, but you can go to 50,000 feet. You can. A higher mind can do it, and you can look back down, and it's no different. The closest I can come to explaining it is when that child lies to you and you know certainly it's not arguable. You've just been lied to by a child. You might not even be able to tell the adult next to you how you knew for certain that was a lie from that child, but there is no arguing the lie has been told and it was to you. It is the same thing. So it's hard to impart to people who are starting out what this is about and how to get there. But I assure anyone listening who's ready to set the childish things aside and head for the adult higher mind, you can do these things. And I will further point out, in our kind of white bread culture in the United States, and I'm not discluding African Americans or anyone else, most of us do not have this one simple thing that some of the oldest cultures do, like a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. At those times in those cultures, a 13-year-old boy, I think it's a 13-year-old girl, I'm not certain, they're told they're adults.
Right.
They're told to set aside their childish things. And when you're told you're an adult, what does that mean? Well, seemingly a 13-year-old Jewish boy could have a kid, right? You're a man now. Seemingly, even though he can't vote until he's 18 because of the statutes in that culture, they don't recognize that. They've just told him he's an adult. You see, but we don't have that. What we have is indoctrination that never ends. When you go to the movies, you'll be indoctrinated in all these things. But there's a point I would make.
No, it's a great point. And think about even in our own country, going back into the early 1800s, into the 1700s, think about when a boy, he reached a certain age, he had become a man. He was expected to do man's work, adult work around the house, on the farm, the same thing with the women. And so when you take a look at the young people today, I mean, it's really, really very sad.
Let me give an example. First of all, Big Bang is showing you, are any of those big PhD smartest people in the world's adults? They just did an episode where one of the girls was saying she didn't feel like an adult yet. She's in her 30s, for crying out loud. Here's a story that encapsulates what my host and I can both remember in our lifetimes. When we were young, a child was expected to be much more capable than a child is now. A child is considered a baby now till they're well into their 20s and treated as such. When I was 10 years old, my father, well, I was one of these people who swam before I walked, but I had to demonstrate I could swim well, which was already a known quantity. I had to tie certain nautical knots, a bowline, a half hitch, I forget all the knots, to prove that I could safely tie the boat back up to the mooring and it would be safe. At 10 years old, I took a boat many miles, whenever I felt like it, to open ocean, many miles away from where we were up this river. To open ocean, I might be gone all day long, and it was expected that I would be okay and that I would know what to do and I would come home safely at 10 years old. When I was about 11 or 12, we created a fort that we floated. It was an A-frame fort that we floated down the beach, pulled up above the high tide line, built a stone wall around, and we never went home for, I think, over a month and a half because we could get lobster, fish, quahogs, which is a hard shell clam here. We could get all the food we needed, which we did, and we could sneak into the fields and grab an ear of corn here and there, which is, I guess, by definition theft, but you know, what's an ear of corn to an 11-year-old kid? But that's what we did. Now, you fast forward to times now and you see how children are treated. When my wife and I go out here now, the school bus stops, this alarm goes off, everyone stops, they walk the kid out, and of course the kid can't walk home. The parents are coming to that bus stop to scoop them right up. Then the bus driver looks under the bus to see if any of these helpless infants lost their way and crawled under the bus for some reason. Then they go behind the bus to see if any of these mentally challenged youngsters might have decided to sit down and start eating their lunch behind the bus. And then they get on the bus and go. And not only that, they have an old intercom system that comes into play. And it drives me berserk because a human being can be so much more. When I was 10, you know, we had sailboat regattas when I was here as a child. When I was 12 years old, we had a Boston whaler and I was the lifeguard. These sailboats would go out. Everyone's children are participating in the regatta. Here I am at 12. And if a boat went over and the person wearing the life preserver got floated up under the sail because they fell under the sail, we would pull them out. There's a 12-year-old kid. The parents on the beach are good with the fact that I'm 12 and I can get their kid out from under the sail. I'm 12. I'm good with, I have the ability to do that. And everybody is understanding that human beings have higher abilities. So those are real stories from a generation ago when a child was viewed as so much more than they are now. I don't know what examples or what your thoughts might be.
No, my father was a Marine, and then he was a police officer. And so when I grew up, Crow, it was my father was very demanding as far as what was expected of us as young men. And so, you know, we grew up very quickly, and we were pretty much out on our own very quickly. And, you know, when I take a look around and I see what's taking place today, it's mind-boggling. It's scary, right? And this is why trying to get the change in place, trying to get people to wake up is very, very difficult. I mean, as an example, I can point to the sky today, and I can take some kids who, and this is an actual story, that they're in their late teens, early 20s, and I will explain to them what's going on in the sky. And they just scoff at it. They look at me like I'm just a crazy old man. Those are just contrails. And so what's happened is they have been so diluted and so programmed to not understand what's going on, to understand the reality that they're operating in, that it's almost to a degree, I hate to say this because some folks are probably going to sigh, but it's like it's almost a lost cause sometimes when you think about it. It's almost, am I talking to myself?
Right.
Am I preaching to the choir? So that leads me to my last question to you, which would be, what motivates you to continue to do the work? Because I got a sense that I'm not the only one who feels this way sometimes, but I keep going. So what makes you keep going?
There's something about this existence which I can't name, describe, smell, touch, maybe even sense, but I understand. This world is not wholly bad. There are positive things here, and for some reason, I got chose out on this path by providence, by my own actions, by cause and effect, but more so in the same way when I reached over, when I panned that scope down, which I never did, and I caught the wave in the way that I did that allowed it to be proven a filmed event, and I reached over to delete it and I didn't. There was providence. There was something. And whether you want to attribute that to the cause and effects of the decisions I have made in my life or a spark of something in this existence that doesn't want us all to be farm animals, which is where this heads, there's something. There's a reason. There's more than this. And I don't know why. I always say, I have nephews, and I don't want those nephews to be slaves. That is a big part of it, but it's more than that, because I think what it comes down to is if doing correct things, right things matters, then what you and I are doing matters. If that is not true, then we live in a place that is law of the jungle, and anytime that zebra's at the watering hole, he can get his frickin' head ripped off if he doesn't pay attention, and that's just the way this place runs, and I refuse to accept it. In the same way, I refuse to accept that if I know certainly that if I do horrible things to other people, that I've set in a cause and event, an effect chain that will put bad, negative ripples into this world. By the same token, I know that if I care and don't harm other things and don't get angry and try to do better, that is what's going out into this world. And that's the closest I can come to answering you. I don't know why, but it is what it is, and this is the way it's going to be, and I'm not quitting.
Good. And as I said before, and we spoke about it earlier, that once you pierce the veil and you open the curtain, there's really no going back. You can't go back into fantasy land. You can't go back into dream state because you are aware now of what's going on.
You'd go crazy.
You'd go crazy. Absolutely. So, all right. So I have kept you here for a very long time, but it has been a great, great conversation. And so before we head out, if you can let the audience know where to find your work.
All right. So here's the deal. Crrow777 on YouTube, which is where, a lot of my work is, all the telescopic work. I'm locked out, but it's still posted. Having said that, all of the free podcasts that Jason Lindgren and I do are posted for free at Crrow777radio.com. That's Crow with 2 R's. Don't read too much into it. It's just about my birth name. That's all it's about. But anyhow, on Crrow777radio.com, you don't need to log in. You don't need to sign up. You can get that first free hour. If you want to support what Jason and I are doing, and I am working to a time when Jason no longer has to be a manager at Guitar Center. That's what I want. We produce some pretty good content. Can you imagine what it would be if Jason didn't have to do what he was doing? That's where I would like to get to someday, but if you want to support what we're doing for about the price of a latte at Starbucks, you can become a member, which comes to, I think it's like $1 a show or something. We're going to have transcripts here soon. Not only that, we may be putting out books of transcripts because there are people volunteering to try to protect what we have done in case the digital thing goes completely sideways. But these transcripts will be available to membership, and that will allow these words that we have spoken to try to do the best we can to go into any language. So there it is. Crrow777radio.com, and of course Jason can be found at Secrets of Saturn on YouTube, but let me tell you something, YouTube is not the place to be anymore, in my view.
Agreed. Well, Crow, I want to say again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a fabulous discussion, and you have an open invitation to come back anytime and talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. Maybe next time Jason will come on and join us.
I'll tell you what, man, it is such kind of a pleasure. And now that I've reached out to other networks, having an opportunity to speak with people that are in my age group, because mostly the people I speak with are not in my age group. Even Jason is 10 years younger than me, although he's a hell of a lot brighter than the average person in your 40s you're ever going to meet.
He's a smart guy.
It's pretty, there's very few things that'll ever come out of my mouth that throw him. As a matter of fact, there are things that come out of his mouth that challenge me. And that's why Jason's around, besides the fact that he's such a great speaker. We will do this again. You say the words, or if you're interested in coming on Crrow777 Radio, that platform is open to you. We got to decentralize now, and this has been a fantastic interview for me. One of the more enjoyable, and just having someone in my age group who can relate to where I've been. It's a rare thing these days for me, because let's face it, you and I are getting old and crusty, man.
All right, Crow. Thank you so much. And again, come back anytime.
Cheers, man.
And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
I'm packing my bags. I'm out of here. Riches to rags. Can't live in fear. This place is surreal. Nobody cares. It has no feel, just blank stares. I'm tired of all the hate. I'm tired of all the dysfunction. I'm tired of being tired. I'm leaving dystopia. I'm not a slave, so please go away. I won't behave. I don't care what you say. I don't sleepwalk. I crawl on my knees. And I don't sheep talk. So you can be pleased. I'm tired of all the hate. I'm tired of all the dysfunction. I'm tired of being tired. I'm leaving dystopia. I'm just blank stares.